Let's talk about film adaptations. Again. Greetings, my name is Nina, welcome back to my channel. So I have made a video on my channel around a year ago about adaptations of books that weren't necessarily that great. In this video, however, I want to do the opposite. I want to name film adaptations that are actually, in my personal opinion, better than the book. Maybe some points here are going to be controversial to some. I'd still choose the films over the books in this case. So in this video, I'm going to name you five film adaptations that turned out to be better than the book, or at least there are a lot of things that the films do better than the books. I don't know, maybe for some this video is going to be a little bit shocking, but still, let's get started. The first adaptation that comes to my mind is Twilight, but only the first book. I'm not going to talk about the rest of the series. So recently I made a reading vlog about Twilight, and one of the things I did in that video was compare some scenes from the book and the film. Now obviously there were things that were changed in the film, and I think that some scenes were handled better in the film. I just watched the vlog. Here's why I consider Twilight film to be better than the book. Well, first of all, we do not have Bella's inner monologue that much. We do not hear about Edward's perfection all the time. Well, if you have seen the reading vlog, you know that probably the main thing that annoyed me about Twilight was Bella's description of Edward. I could not stop looking at his flawless skin or whatever. The films, however, they are different. Sure, the film does have Bella's inner monologue, but it's nothing like in the film, even though a few lines made it into the film. I really like the three things I was absolutely certain seen. And obviously the film is more action-packed. A lot of things were done in the film pretty well, and the film was pretty much exciting. Sure, it's still kinda cringy, well, because it's based on a cringy book, but it's less cringy than the book itself. At least it's enjoyable, and I really like the scene between Edward and James, the battle scene. But I do think that there are two downsides to the film. They did not include the backstories of Carlisle and Alice. As far as I remember, that was the case. Well, at least the first one. The first one was actually pretty enjoyable. This is something you would definitely watch in the fall, because you have this color spectrum, and then you have the forests, you have the rain, and so on. Now, let's move on. The next film adaptation that I think is better than the book, and actually the film is much more famous than the book, is The Blade Runner. So The Blade Runner is the title of the film. The film is that The Blade Runner is based on is named Do the Android's Dream of Electric Sheep. The book is actually pretty small, less than 200 pages. It's a very short novella, and the events that happen in the book, they also happen in the film, but obviously there are some aspects that were changed, and I do not remember how it was in the book that much, but the film faces a dilemma whether the main character, Deckard, is a replicant himself, or is he a human. Personally, I do think that he's a human. He's not a replicant, but still. Okay, I do understand the fact that films tend to be more action-packed than the books. The culmination scene toward the end, the climax scene, is better in the film than it is in the book, because in the book it happens pretty fast, in a matter of a few pages, but in the film it's action-packed, and the film itself, even though it's pretty slow, it's pretty atmospheric. I'd watch it again. Yes, of course there are a few moments that the book handles better than the film, but still the film adaptation, in my personal opinion, is better than the book. The third adaptation that I think is better than the book is Erist Wieder Da, aka Look Who's Here. He's Back Again, the film adaptation of the book of the same name by Timur Fermesh. The premise of the book and of the film is pretty simple. Adolf Hitler wakes up in 2011's Germany and then he tries to start again. Why I think the film is better than the book? Well, I think that's because while the book started out pretty well, it later took a completely different direction, but the film is actually pretty funny, it's pretty solid. Okay, I do think that the ending was much better in the book than in the film. Spoiler alert, in the film it's quite too tragic. The book's ending was better, but in overall the film was much more thrilling, exciting and funnier, and the book took a completely different direction. Instead of being an actual solid satire, it focused on something different entirely. Next adaptation that was definitely better than the book, it's The Road. I have a reading vlog of The Road by Cormac McCarthy on my channel, and I read the book and I comment what I read, and then I watched the film for the vlog, and the film turned out to be much better than the book. So when you read the book, it basically goes on like this. They go somewhere and then father and son have a dialogue. They have a brief dialogue, rinse and repeat. So another thing that affected my perception of the book were the comments from various people regarding the book and the film. A lot of people said that this was the scariest book and the scariest film that I ever watched. It was way too heavy. It was way too brutal. I was afraid of reading the book and watching the film. But after I did, I was like, nah, it wasn't that scary. I do need to point out that back in the day, I watched a lot of The Walking Dead, and The Walking Dead was pretty brutal. Not only the show, but especially the source material, the original comics. It was dark and very brutal, and after The Walking Dead, nothing seems to surprise me, and when I read The Road, I wasn't really that scared. But the film adaptation was actually pretty much exciting. The film adaptation is loyal to the book. There aren't too many changes, and when you watch the film, you feel the suspense that the book doesn't really give out. And even though the adaptation is pretty gloomy and dark, there are a few uplifting moments. Well, spoiler alert, the one there where the father and the son, they discover the bunker. Oh, by the way, the two main characters, father and son, they do not have names, so in the reading vlog I called them Roland and Jake respectively, after the main characters from the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. I just kept saying Roland and Jake. Yeah, because the dad reminded me a little bit. Oh wait, not only of Roland, but also of Rick Grimes in The Walking Dead. The film was done really well. It was quite solid. So I have seen a lot of comments saying, oh, the film was way too heavy, I wouldn't watch it again, too dark, too brutal. I disagree with that. The Road came out 1 year before The Walking Dead, and after The Walking Dead, other survival horror films, they aren't really that scary for me. So the book is quite fast-paced. While it does have a few brutal moments, and the film does too, it still isn't that dark or scary as others claim. Or maybe if you have seen or read The Walking Dead, nothing would seem that scary to you. Okay, quick note, The Road does not have zombies. No zombies there, but The Walking Dead and The Road are both post-apocalyptic stories. And while The Walking Dead focuses on survival of various groups of people and also them fighting zombies, walkers, they never call them zombies. The Road is simply the story of a father and son trying to survive. They are wandering around the United States trying to find food and shelter. And I also really like the atmosphere of the film. And finally we reached the point number 5. This is going to be probably the most controversial statement in this video, because the fans of the book are going to be really mad, I think. Okay, I do understand the fact that the film came to me earlier than the book, and the film is basically in my DNA now, and I read the book much later and liked it, but the book was really slow and really difficult for me to read, while the films, or to be exact, the films and the books, not the film and the book, It's plural, not singular. I'm talking about not one or two, but 3 books, and not 1 or 2, but 3 films. And you probably guessed what the books I'm talking about, what trilogy I mean here, and obviously I'm talking about Lord of the Rings. Excuse me here, but if I have to choose between the books and the films, I'd probably choose the films. Rare case when I would do that. Now, obviously I love the books, I reread them, and this is the only book or book series that I have in 3 copies. So I have my old editions, the English version, and a new also edition. No other book has that honor here. So I'm in the process of reading the series. I have read the first one, I'm started reading the second, and now obviously there are a lot of changes that the films did. Well, let's be honest, all film adaptations, they change some plot lines or details from the books. But still, Lord of the Rings films, despite all the changes, were done so well. These films are absolutely phenomenal. I do really need to admit that while reading the first book for the first time, I started to envy people who read The Lord of the Rings before Peter Jackson came up with his trilogy. If you happen to be that person who read the books before the films came out, I do kinda envy you, because the films completely altered my perception of the books. Yeah, that happens when the film adaptation comes out and then you read the book. You do remember the scenes from the film, but I do not think that any other film affected my perception of its source material like Lord of the Rings did. I can read Harry Potter and A Song of Ice and Fire without thinking of the films too much, but Lord of the Rings? No way. I'm sorry to every single Tolkien fan out there. Tolkien wrote phenomenal books, there's no denying that. But the films from Peter Jackson were also very phenomenal, like I said, and they were there for me before the books. You know what? Prior to making this video, I did remember the words from Christopher Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien's son. He bashed the films because he said, well, Jackson disregarded my father's legacy and he made action movies for teenagers or something like that. I do not remember the exact quote, I'm sorry. And I do really recognize that there is a seed of truth in this. But nonetheless, the films handled the books with so much care, still better than any other film adaptations of these days. Okay, I do really need to admit the fact that when I started reading the first book, Fellowship of the Ring, it was very difficult for me to read, and I needed multiple attempts to finish the book. Oh, I do really recognize the fact that I also had quite a difficult translation on my hands. Well, in case you didn't know, Lord of the Rings has different Russian translations. There isn't one Russian translation, there are multiple. And the first book I had quite a difficult translation, and this is why it was hard for me to read the book, one of the reasons. Even without that, Tolkien does really focus on nature, on the lore, etc. And that's not exactly the case in the films. The films are much more, I'd say, character driven. You know what, I'd rather not speak too much. Now, obviously, there are things about the films that I would criticize personally, is that how they handled Frodo and Faramir. Their characters were kind of butchered. They deserved better. And also, while reading the book, I understood that I do kind of miss the whimsical aspect of Lord of the Rings. And the book's quite whimsical. Well, they do have whimsical moments, but in a way that it isn't annoying or cringy or whatever. It's done with taste. Still, the films are still really solid, incredible, and everything. Despite all the plotline changes and the detail changes, they're still phenomenal films. I would name Lord of the Rings my favorite movie of all time if it wasn't a trilogy. aka there weren't multiple movies, so I have to choose one film. I would name Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which is also an adaptation of the book, but I haven't read it. Before I finish, one honorable mention, a really rare case where I like the book and film equally. It's The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, the 2005 adaptation, I mean. So I watched the film multiple times when I was younger, and then I read the book. and recognized that the film and the book, despite the changes, they're equal in my eyes. Prince Caspian, on the other hand, the film wasn't that great. The book was definitely better. Alright, that's all. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Maybe you would disagree with me, but that's completely okay. What are the films that you think are better than their book counterparts? Let me know down in the comments. See you next time. Goodbye.